First of all, it's sad about stereotypes because until we've walked in someone's shoes, we don't know all the reasons that someone is in a situation. And certainly there can be a lot of people too that had been working and lose their jobs or other things happen that, or they're disabled. So there's so many factors. And as you say, we don't always know the situation where people live and the food that they have available. So I think there's a lot of structural and social.
You're listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage. We're here to plant seeds on compassion to animals, your health, and the environment, and topics related to business that align with all three of those areas. Enjoy the show. Well, I have to say, I am so excited today to invite onto the show, Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show, Dr. Angela Crawford. I've known Angela for a few years, and I have to say, I have really watched Dr. Angela Crawford blossom. From somebody who was talking about this particular book that we're going to speak of today, to somebody who has published it, and it's all over social media. Angela has been a vegan for quite a few years now, started out as a vegetarian, but I'm going to let her tell the story of how she went from, her degree was going to be in journalism, then she became a psychotherapist. Am I correct, Dr. Crawford?
Yes.
And then from there, with being a vegan, now is a renowned author, a speaker, a podcast guest, and just the whole nine yards. And her whole deal is about transforming the world through veganism. So, Dr. Angela Crawford, great to have you here today.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
You betcha. So let's start with, first of all, I should tell people who I am in case they have no clue who I am. I'm the host of the show, Kathleen Gage, and I'd love to have you share what your journey was from when you were vegetarian and you kind of got what it meant to not harm animals through eating, but there was a invisible line you crossed where you became a vegan. So let's start with how you became vegetarian, and then what was the catalyst for you becoming vegan?
Yeah. I always love to reflect on the whole journey because we see it differently now that time has passed. We understand it so much better. But for me first, I grew up in the Midwest. I ate the way probably many of us do in America, the standard American diet, and a not very healthy version of it, with lots of comfort foods, convenient foods, sweets, microwave meals, and not interested in cooking at all. And then I saw this program on PBS that happened to feature workers in a meat processing plant. It was back in late 2006. The program didn't show anything too dramatic or too gory. It just mainly featured the workers and the horrific working conditions they were in, and that they were immigrants, and many didn't feel they had other options. And so as I watched the program, and the employer that they worked for was discouraging them from seeking treatment or taking time off work, or they might lose their job and their only livelihood. As I watched that, it just got me thinking about how my food got to me. And, it seems like we should think about this before, but for some reason, maybe because food was sort of an emotionally charged issue for me, as it is, I think, for some of us, I just hadn't looked deeper. And seeing that got me thinking, I don't think I want to support this industry, the animal agriculture industry. And I'm going to look into plant-based eating. So I bought a cookbook the very next day, went right to the bookstore, bought it, took it home, got the ingredients, ended up having to go out and buy new pots and pans. I was making this lasagna. It was really delicious. I found a whole new world opened up because for some reason, it was different cooking this way. It was an adventure. There were new colors and flavors and ingredients. So I made the lasagna and shared it with my in-laws who liked it. And I began reading everything I could, as I think a lot of us do early on that journey. And I knew very quickly if I didn't like how the workers were treated, that I would have some strong feelings also about the animals. And as I read and learned, it just, everything I learned just broke my heart. I read, Diet for a New America and some of those other books. And just when I learned about animal agriculture and factory farming and just everything that happens, just meat could not be on the menu anymore. And I learned about the health part and all that too. And that also impacted me because I have a family history of heart disease.
Hmm.
So, and I read everything nutritionally I could. I wanted to do it as healthy as possible. So I tried to eat a fairly healthy version, but I had not given up all dairy and eggs and stuff yet. I kind of knew intellectually from things I'd read it would be a good idea, both in environmentally, ethically, health-wise, but I hadn't made that emotional connection the way I had with meat yet. And I think what happened was as I was growing, it took several years, but as I was growing personally, becoming more true to myself along my life journey, I just started to not feel okay with it.
Right.
And I decided I'm going to read and learn what I need to make that connection for becoming vegan. It's going to happen. So early 2019 was the time. Why then? I don't know, just the stage in life I was in. I'm not sure. Maybe I'd read and heard enough that finally something clicked. But I made a concerted effort that I'm going to do this. I set a time frame and I watched a lot of the videos and documentaries to help it really, you know, really make an emotional connection with it.
Right.
Because once we do that, then it's not so much of a struggle, you know, it's sort of like this is the only way to live. So I did that, and well, yeah, I watched Earthlings among other things, and that was just it was enough to know this is how I want to live. And not only is it how I want to live, being fully vegan, I want to share it with others because I see how it affects everything I care about.
I have to say that with your journey, and since starting to read your book, I had a friend visiting recently. She's in her 80s, and she is mostly vegetarian, leaning towards vegan, but still holding on to the dairy and the eggs. And she has a spiritual teacher who she's had for about 30 or 40 years who said, you don't need to be vegetarian anymore. You can eat meat. And my friend was telling me this, and I said, well, if that's what she believes, that's okay, but I do it for the animals. And your book really, which I want to show people the book, it's Vegan Transformation. And we're going to talk a lot about this today. But I'm really glad I read it before she came to visit because I tend to be very in your face. It's like, well, just give up meat. It's really simple. Do you know what you're doing to the animals? And I've worked in the pet industry before as a keynote speaker, as a blogger, as a trainer for organizations that wanted to get visibility. And it shocked me that there are a lot of people in the animal industry, pet stores, veterinarians, whatever it may be, rescuers who actually eat meat. And I'm like, how does that happen? And what I find interesting because Cheryl Moss, who you were on her show, the Better Life for Animals podcast, one of the criteria for her show is that nobody who consumes any meat or dairy will be on the show. That's really the line in the sand. And I'm amazed at how many people who run sanctuaries actually consume meat. And it's like, you have a gentle way of approaching that. I don't. And yet, by reading books like yours and by having people like you in my circle of influence and somebody I consider a friend, it makes it easier for me. So, what can you recommend to people who, we have found the holy grail of eating. We feel this is the way it should be. We know, we've dug deep, but other people aren't getting it, and maybe our spouse. I'm in a mixed home. My spouse is not vegan, and that can create some interesting challenges. So what's your recommendation to people?
Yeah, I can relate, even though I might come across in more gentle ways. There have been times I've been frustrated, like any of us might be, and just want to just say whatever is on my mind, or just vent, or get frustrated because we see the suffering. And so first, I just want to normalize that it's understandable when you see suffering, you want it to end, and you want people to be aware. I think the challenge is that a lot of us discover that just venting out our feelings or criticizing someone or being harsh to someone doesn't have the effect that we want a lot of times. So then
Mhm.
we step back and we're like, okay, I have to think about what is communication that's going to be more impactful or have more the effect I want. So I think it helps first to realize we all had a journey, unless we were blessed to be born vegan. We've all had a journey, and remembering our own journey and our own blindness, our own disconnect, that can sometimes help to be a little bit more patient when others aren't getting it right away.
Right.
And, I think of Dr. Melanie Joy's work of why, from her book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, where she really showed we are conditioned from such a young age that this is how we do things. We don't even
Right.
question it. And we keep that disconnect up because it comes at us from every angle, from our doctors to from the media, from other authorities. So I think having patience and understanding, first of all, that we're all wired into this, and just telling someone doesn't change things. It has to connect somehow for that person. And we might just be one seed
Right.
planting, in that journey.
And it's so true. And I have to look at myself. I was 64 when I went vegan, and that
Yeah.
was in 2018. And so when I see somebody who's younger than me that is struggling with it, it's like, who am I to judge? And yet I do put on my judgment hat. And I was reading a Facebook post recently, a woman who probably was in her 30s. She goes, I think I'm just too old to go vegan. And people are like, oh, no, 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 no. You're never too old to save the animals. But with your, you mentioned about cooking, that in your book, you mentioned that you really never liked cooking, but once you started eating plant-based, there was a whole different energy around it. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. When I tried that first recipe, it was like something shifted inside of me. And I think there were a few reasons. One is that I had a strong motivation for why, and it went beyond myself. Before I thought, oh, I should eat healthier. I didn't really know what that looked like because we get such weird mixed messages from the media and everybody as to what is healthy. But I thought I should eat healthier. But when I learned about the workers and the animals and all the interconnections between that and what I ate, and then added in the health part of it, it gave me a strong motivation for wanting to change. And then I think the food itself, once I opened my mind to exploring it, it was delicious. And I had eaten at a plant-based conference center a few months before I became vegetarian, which I think opened my mind a little bit that this could be good. I just, wasn't ready to start cooking
Right.
yet. But when I learned then the why, the reason why for shifting my lifestyle, that added in with discovering how it became an adventure rather than a chore or a deprivation or, a restriction. It was my world opened up actually.
Well, speaking of opening up, your world opening up on your endorsements in your book, I mean, you have some really heavy hitters that have given you endorsements for the book. And just reading that section gave me a shift in perception. It was just like, wow. And I got really excited about what the rest of the book was going to be about. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I think a lot of us understand this once we really look at the big picture, are the workers within the factory farms that oftentimes people will say, well, how could anybody work there? And sometimes that's the only choice they have. That's the only choice to literally put food on their table. And oftentimes they're undocumented immigrants, which is creating an interesting scenario now with the current administration. But what have you discovered about your own realization of truly being more compassionate to the people that don't want to be there, and in a sense they're forced, and then there's the comparison to the people who they're okay with being there, they're okay with hurting animals, they've really shut down their feelings. So what can you share about that?
Yeah, I think, again, as we're all raised to compartmentalize our feelings about animals, where we extend compassion to certain animals, but not others, unless we've moved into this vegan direction where we've opened up our compassion more to all beings. We've all been compartmentalized that way. And so someone that's working in that setting for whatever reasons, whether it's, the primary employer in their where they live and there's not many other options, whether they are an immigrant, undocumented or legal, either way, they might still not have a lot of options. So they end up working in these places and maybe even believing it's a good thing because the message, is like, oh, you're providing food. And But then when you're in that setting, and I've never been in one, I don't know how I would survive being in that, being an empath, but from what I understand, that type of work, and especially the people that have to do the more, the actual killing part of it,
Right.
they become desensitized because they're
Hmm.
doing this work over and over again. It's sort of like if you had to watch a horror movie again and again, you stop feeling some of the feelings, but it still takes a toll. And there's certainly research that suggests that people that work in those, especially those tough jobs at the beginning of the line, the slaughter line, that have to do more with the actual killing and, all of that stuff, they have a higher rate of alcohol abuse and domestic violence. And so it comes out somewhere in their life. I think it takes a toll on them. Plus, the work is very dangerous. They are at risk of injuries. It To me, it just seems like horrible work. And I wish there was a day we didn't have to have that even be, that there could be just better work for the people
I,
instead of
I
that.
agree, and I think truly that your book. I have to say that I'm very very impressed with your book, and I don't say that often. And I usually have 5 or 6 books going at once, and yours is the one that I'm spending a lot of time with right now. But that truly, if we could have a vegan transformation for people to whatever level that it hits on, whether it's for their health, whether it's for the environment or the animals, and ultimately to truly be a vegan, I believe that it has to be about the animals. And mine started with health. It was plant-based eating. I would not call myself a vegan because it's like vegans were crazy. And now I have a shirt I was actually doing laundry earlier and I saw my shirt that says vegan AF, which if anybody knows what AF stands for, I wear that to the gym and it's like I'm proud of it. I have a beanie cap that says have a vegan day. But it's for me, it definitely started with health. If it had been, which is so ironic because we have been rescuing animals for about 20 years now, and we have a small, self-funded, small sanctuary not open to the public. We've got horses, chickens, rooster, dogs, and these are all animals that have come to us that we give them a life until they're done with this lifetime. But the vegan transformation, how did you come up with that title? And what was the motivation behind writing this particular book?
Yeah. Well, a few things. I had about 7 or 8 years ago gone through a transformational coaching program that, added into my psychology background just another layer of always liking to learn and grow personally. And so this helped me to work on myself. At the same time, I was learning some new skills that could help clients. And it was called transformational coaching. And so I became really interested in that whole concept of how we change in ways that are just more than minor, but there's something in us that awakens or becomes maybe a fuller, truer version of ourself. So that concept of transforming in that way, not that like there's something wrong with us and we have to like lose
Mm-hmm.
weight, not that kind of transformation, more of an inner shift, a metamorphosis, sort of like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. We're
Mm-hmm.
becoming a more true, authentic version of ourselves. So I really loved that concept, and I've always been fascinated by our own growth. But then when I became vegan, I transformed in ways that I couldn't have imagined. So for me, it wasn't so much a health thing because I was really blessed to have started the vegetarian thing before I ever had health issues. But I do have a family history. I'm pretty sure I would have over time had
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been blessed not to have any health issues. But for me, it was more going from you and I've talked before about me being an introvert. So I
Right.
still am an introvert in that I need to recover when I have lots of social contact and stuff like that. But I also was very reserved and didn't have social media, didn't have a website, didn't have a blog, and all those things when I became vegan, it's like now I need to have those things. I need to grow into somebody beyond where I've been because I need to share this.
Right.
So,
Right.
and so there were other transformations, just feeling more at peace spiritually, feeling free. Like I'd known something wasn't right about eating animals, I guess, at some level, but I just hadn't acknowledged it until I stopped. And then now I felt freer and lighter. And I talked to other vegans who felt similar feelings. and had their own transformations. Look how many people discover a purpose through veganism. Your work, my work, others that we know and talk to. So I wanted to study that because I felt that there were a lot of books about the health aspects of veganism physically. There's certainly a lot about the ethical reasons for choosing a vegan lifestyle, but what changes in us psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually when we embark on a vegan lifestyle? I hadn't seen as much about that. So that's why I wanted to study that and do interviews and surveys to explore that.
And that's so interesting because I have two podcast shows. One's called Vegan Visibility, and this one is Plant-Based Eating for Health. And when I looked at the numbers, the show that gets the most downloads, I've had nearly 250,000 downloads on this show, compared to about 20,000 on the other show. And I put equal amounts of effort into it. So in analyzing that, being the marketing person I am, I thought, how will I have that entree into people's hearts, mind, and souls about the vegan message? And if it means talking about plant-based eating, we're going to do it, because eventually we're going to get into the vegan stuff. Now, what's interesting is you have, how many people did you interview for the book? 350 initially, and then 75?
I did about 350 surveys where people
Okay.
filled out. And in fact, you were one of the people to fill it out. You filled out my survey. It was online and it had about 12 questions that asked about the emotional, social, and spiritual changes people had on their vegan journey. And then I followed up with 75 people with more in-depth interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you were one of those people, and you're actually quoted in my book.
I think in
So
chapter 4, if I'm not
yes,
mistaken.
exactly.
Be sure to go to chapter 4.
That's right. So yes, I interviewed 75 of the people, for like hour-long in-depth interviews because I wanted to have more of a in-depth feeling of what their journeys were like. And so I share some of those stories in the book to exemplify the key points
Right.
and experiences.
Well, one thing that you mentioned is that we all have our own contribution to the movement. And initially, and it even says it in the book, in my small part of the interview, is that initially I thought when I went vegan that I was going to immerse myself, become a nutritionist. I was going to coach people on their eating. And I soon found out I just don't have the patience for that's not my wheelhouse at all. And I've been a marketer for decades. I've been a keynote speaker for decades. And I thought, okay, where can I really have the greatest impact while living my passion? And it was doing what I was doing before, but in a whole different market. So as you interviewed people, what was the thing that you noticed about how people really gravitated, like Robert Cheek, for example? He's an incredible bodybuilder. I mean, you look at his before and after and you go, he was a skinny little kid. And now he's like this massive, muscular man, and it's all plant-based and vegan. How would you say, what was the common thread with people really like tapping into what their passion is and what their purpose of, and how does it continue to evolve? Because I know for me, what I started at in 2018, thinking of what I would be doing and what I've done along the way, I've had a few stops and starts. And now I've kind of got a rhythm going, but I know that anything could change that, as long as it's aligned with the vegan message. So what was that common thread?
Yeah, well, people found a variety of ways that they shared their passion for veganism. And some in more of a volunteer basis, but many had created more of a professional contribution from it. And I feel that perhaps it was an intersection between their specific areas of passion within veganism, because some were more maybe focused on the food aspects and providing, food and cooking and recipes and teaching those skills. Others were more interested in specifically health and physical health, and maybe had backgrounds as doctors or other professionals. And then there were some more interested in just various aspects. So I think it's taking the area of focus that they feel most connected with, taking their gifts and experience that they already have, as you're describing, and then where can they make a difference? Where is there a need that they can that they can meet? And it's a journey of discovery, I think, because sometimes we try, like you say, like I've often thought, gosh, I should really learn more about the nutrition. And like you, I've taken some of the courses like the T. Colin Campbell course, and I'm interested in that. But that were all I was doing, that's just not where my heart is. I'm psychology and psychosocial, emotional, spiritual. That's like where my background and interest is. So I think many of us, we might start in one area and then discover, well, I'm not going to be like someone else. I can only be me. And
Right.
so how do I bring the gifts I already have to help this movement? And I think that's where people end up being most impactful. Whether it always translates into income, that varies. I think some people do it out of just a passion for doing it, and it may not be an income maker, and others it becomes a business and they, can bring those together. But yes, I think over time, people found I need to bring the gifts and experience I already have when possible, because it's going to have a lot more impact that way.
Right, right. Well, and it's interesting because when I decided to shift from the general market, small businesses, micro businesses, and really focus on the vegan market, fortunately, I had the information of how to jumpstart that. And I started with a summit, and Katrina Fox was part of it. Stephanie Red Cross West was part of it. Let's see, I'm trying to think of all the people, John Oberg. And so I basically use the very strategies that I teach my clients. And I had people saying, oh, you'll never make money in the vegan space. And it's like, last month I had, or no, this month, it's been my best month in quite some time. And COVID really impacted my business. And it was like, okay, what would I advise to a client? So I think it's important for people to realize that, yes, in fact, you can make money in this industry. And for some people, they have an issue around, well, I shouldn't charge for what my passion is. And if I'm saving the animals, and it's like, if your business isn't making money, you can't make money, which actually leads into the selling of the book. I understand your book just hit #1 in a category. What category on Amazon is that?
Yeah, it was #1 new release in animal rights.
That's
And
amazing. That
yeah.
congratulations, because that's quite a feat. A lot of people they don't know what goes on to get a book to get visibility. But with your book, now you had the 350 surveys, then you had the 75 in-depth interviews. What did you find that you most enjoyed about those interviews? And was there anything other than a lot of time that you didn't enjoy about the interviews?
Well, the interviews I absolutely loved. I think that's just something, again, part of my background and personality, connecting with people, learning their stories, discovering themes and I don't know, common ground that we have, and discovering their journeys of healing and transformation, or how they're making a difference or how they're experiencing a difference. So I enjoyed them. In fact, so much that if I was interviewing someone in Australia or some other, country, and I had to get up early to make it fit our time zone differences, I didn't mind, because I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it just, to me, I loved it. That common ground we feel with other vegans, especially too, that I think other people that share our passion, let's put it that way. It's just,
Right.
I don't know. So it was deep, that part of the whole book experience, that was really wonderful. There were some parts that were harder, getting into the writing and stuff. I mean, even though I enjoyed that,
Yes.
ultimately that was actually harder for me. But
It is a chore, because we were talking about before we started this interview that I'm working on a book right now to do with 30 years in the speaking industry as a professional speaker. And I've been working on it for a while, but I also have client work that I do. So, and I don't want to get so consumed by my business. It's like, that's not why I run a business. And in the past, trust me, I worked those 14, 16, 18-hour days, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. But with vegan transformation, now you do have some very, very, very well-known vegans who are in the book. And then you have people that are, they're just going about their life being vegan. Who are some of the people that are recognized names within the industry?
yeah, I was trying to think. Well, one person that I interviewed, maybe not everybody would know, but she's a really special person, is Nancy Arenas, who lives in New Mexico and runs
Yes.
the Veg Fest there in Albuquerque. In fact, I spoke there last summer at her invitation, and that's where I met Robert Cheek. Um, So she's a really special person who shares, how she became vegan for the animals and then happened to heal fibromyalgia along the way. So, and then now shares it with others through her Veg Fest and through a podcast and a magazine, all this stuff.
Hmm.
Jeff Palmer, he's as you know him, he's a vegan bodybuilder as well and has a fitness supplement company. And he's just so inspiring in how he tries to share this message with men because he points out only 20% of vegans, according to one statistic, are men. He wants to have more men
Wow, I didn't know that.
ready to, yeah. He says, meat and masculinity are so tied together often in the messaging that sometimes men haven't been as receptive, but he's trying to show through his fitness and other stuff that, hey, this is a great thing for men to do too. So he was an awesome person to interview. Yeah, I'm trying to remember some of the others. There were so many wonderful people, Jackie Solomon, who is, I think, in Arizona, that she does a lot of work trying to help people that have just are more disadvantaged in terms of having access to food and stuff. Yeah,
I'd like to talk about that for a minute because I was watching a thread recently on Facebook from this person who tends to lean very, very, very right, far to the right, and is very judgmental about people who use SNAP. And there's this big issue going on right now to take away all the junk food, and they can't buy sodas and chips, and which I think is a great thing, but I think there's more to it than just that because in some locations people have been redlined and that's all they can get. It's like there are parts of our country where people literally cannot get that bag of legumes and they don't have a stove to cook on. They don't have a pot to cook in. We won't say the other one, but they don't have a pot to cook in, and they really don't. And so I think that it's really important for people to understand that it's not so black and white that, oh, you just go vegan and then you go buy organic food and all that. How can somebody who really is at a disadvantage, and unfortunately, it's usually lower income people, it's people of color, it's the people that have been discriminated against for years. In this thread, the comments that people were making, like those people on SNAP, they don't work and they don't do this and that, and they just have babies to get more welfare money. And it's like people are very cruel. And so, how can we raise awareness around the fact that it's not just a matter of saying, okay, I'm gonna go vegan, and then all of a sudden you have these beautiful meals. What can people do to eat healthy if they're on a budget?
Yeah. First of all, it's sad about stereotypes because until we've walked in someone's shoes, we don't know all the reasons that someone is in a situation. And certainly there can be a lot of people too that had been working and lose their jobs or other things happen that, or they're disabled. So there's so many factors. And as you say, we don't always know the situation where people live and the food that they have available. So I think there's a lot of structural and social factors that play into all of that that often we can overlook and just judge people without knowing,
Right, right.
But if someone were in a situation, there are some great resources. Like one person that I follow, her newsletter regularly is the Plant Based on a Budget newsletter and book. I blanking on her name, Tony.
Is it Jen? Jen?
Jen and Tony maybe is the other one. Tony is the first name of one of them. It's a female.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. But she
And
has
she's out of
budget.
Australia or something, or
I'm not sure where
UK?
she's from,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
plant-based on a budget, if you Google that, she has lots of tips. And the idea is that, there are ways you can cook plant-based, really getting to the basics. I mean, that's the healthiest version of it. If we were, vegan is only expensive if we're buying a lot of the processed pre-made versions of things. If we're eating, like you mentioned, those beans, if we do have a pot and a stove, or even canned beans are relatively inexpensive
Right,
compared to a
right,
lot of things. So, yes, the beans, getting salad greens or broccoli, and sweet potatoes, those are often foods that are less expensive but are super healthy. So there's some superfoods that are really inexpensive, and they're the ones that actually are going to help our health the most. So greens,
right.
salads.
Right. Well, I do want to talk about health, but before we do, where can people find you, Angela? What's the best
Yeah.
website to go to, and where can they get this amazing book, Vegan
Uh,
Transformation? And I'm speaking very highly of it, and I mean it sincerely to all the listeners and all the viewers. I want you to go out and get this book. I want you to go ahead and read it. I want you to have your own transformation, and then post a review on Amazon because that really helps with the rankings. And what you're going to find is the more that you help this book to get legs, if you will, the more people will be helped because it's not just about the animals. That's the biggest part, but it's about the environment. Look at all the floods, look at the hurricanes, look at the tornadoes. It's about violent behaviors. It's about people's health. And so please go out and do yourself a favor and buy this a copy and buy one for a friend too. So where can they find it?
well, thank you for sharing that. And uh, to contact me, angelacrawfordphd.com. And it's available at all major booksellers. But if you go to angelacrawfordphd.com in the book tab, I have a list of all the booksellers, or at least several of them, like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, and a few others. So you can click on the links to go to wherever you want to buy it. And I do greatly appreciate it and the reviews if you leave them,
Absolutely.
as Kathleen is saying. I view it as being written both to those who are already vegan that want to thrive even more on their journey and be reminded of why this matters and, to feel inspired, but also the veg curious because it's written in a way that's non-judgmental. It's written in a way to invite people into exploring some of these issues more and to realize that being vegan, as we talked about a little bit ago, is not depriving, but actually abundant. And also, as we open our compassion, it's healing for us too.
Absolutely. What I love is that at home, I've been married with my wife for, well, legally 10 years, but we've been together 35. And I've had people say, how can you be with somebody who's not 100% vegan? And she's getting there. She's getting there. What's really nice is lately I've been getting requests for certain types of foods. Like, can you make me those lentils with the walnuts and the onions and all that? And it's like, oh yeah, of course. And there's something to be said about when you're cooking a meal and you know what it's going to do for somebody's health, which actually leads into the next question. One of what they're discovering is inflammation is probably the greatest trigger for so many diseases that we deal with today, whether it be heart disease, whether it be arthritis, whether it be it could be dementia and Alzheimer's. There's cancers. So, what can you say to the people that are kind of sitting on the fence, but they know they need to do something for their health? What would be an insight or something that somebody from the book might have shared that would help somebody to realize that once their health changes, everything changes?
Yeah. Yeah. Several of the people I interviewed had inspiring health transformations and had healed from cancer, from autoimmune disease, and other cardiovascular disease. There's some really inspiring stories in the chapter on health empowerment where people had learned in some way, whether it be a documentary or a book or someone mentioning it, that you may want to try a plant-based lifestyle. And when they did it, things shifted in their life. One great example of that you and I both know is Linda Middlesworth, who now at age 81 or something, is still teaching aerobics classes after going vegan 45 years or so ago.
Right,
So
right.
she's an amazing example that healed many, many conditions and now lives a very vibrant, healthy life that's really centered around helping people heal their own health issues as well as awaken people to the compassion for animals. And, the inflammation piece, it also affects mental health. I do cover in there a little bit about the food mood connection and that there's a link between inflammation and depression. So, and fiber and depression, that if we actually eat more fiber, it lessens our risk of depression. And only, as you and I know, only plant foods have fiber.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
there's definitely, and I think when we learn about what we can do for our health, it's not only that it, gives us healing sometimes and more energy and that we can engage in everything we love. We also have more power and empowerment versus just only feeling that we're at the mercy of only the medical system.
Right.
Yes, we may need the medical system at different times, but there's things we can do with our lifestyle and our nutrition that can make such a big difference. So that's empowering.
Well, I was listening to a podcast with a gentleman he's an MD, but he's a naturopath, I think.
Hmm.
And he said 13 years ago when he started his practice, he was considered an oddity and people avoided him like the plague. They really trashed him for what he was doing. And today it's much more accepted. And people are realizing that medicine has its place. And he said that. He goes, pharmaceuticals have their place, but unfortunately, that's the go-to with a lot of doctors. It's like a churn and burn kind of situation. And with the billions upon billions of dollars that are used in advertising to get people to really start imagining some of their diseases, a plant-based diet, you do it for a week or two, you will be amazed at what can happen. So, what do you see happening within the vegan movement, the plant-based movement, and with all that's going on? Because right now, like with RFK, he's trying to get the red dye taken out and doing some. I have to say, I have to give him credit for some of what he's doing. Although Michelle Obama tried to do some of it, but that's a whole different discussion. But unfortunately, I also heard him talk about getting whole milk back in schools, and it's like, what? Why? And so, but I do know why, because it's all around the greenback. So, what can you advise to people or recommend to people who they are not feeling good, and you and I both know that if for a week or two they went 100% whole food, plant-based, no salt, no sugar, no oil, I mean, really got dramatic about it and drastic about it, they would see a drastic change. But what can you advise to people?
Yeah. I think first, realizing we do get a lot of confusing messaging around nutrition, and I think that affects a lot of us in trying to figure out what way to go. But once I connected with the whole plant-based nutrition thing, it suddenly really made sense that, food from the earth, food from the ground that has all these nutrients and antioxidants, yeah, it makes sense. It would actually be very nourishing for our bodies. And when you think about, I learned later about the blue zones, those geographic areas that have much better health and longevity and physical well-being and stay active until later in life. They eat a predominantly plant-based diet that's mostly whole foods and fresh. You just think about all that and it starts to make sense that yes, eating more naturally, more whole foods and more closer to nature. And then yes, animal flesh has inflammatory compounds, it has cholesterol, it has saturated fat. All of these things have been shown to affect heart disease. So first just realizing it makes sense and trying it and getting help with how do you do this in a way that's workable for you? Finding maybe some easy recipes or, finding ways to veganize your favorite meals to make them plant-based. Just getting started. And then, as you say, even committing to say, I'm going to try this for 10 days, 2 weeks, and you'll see changes and it'll probably propel you to want to continue more.
That's actually what's happening at home because Karen is a park ranger and works really hard. Park rangers work very, very, very hard. And so that, like as she gets older, she's in her 60s and she goes, I don't know how long I can do this. I said, let's eat more plants, and she's feeling great now. She goes, that inflammation, it's going away. So, which is a great thing. So, in closing, Angela, first of all, this has been delightful. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you. What are your final thoughts for people? And is there anything else that you want to share that maybe I didn't cover?
Yeah, well, it's inspiring for me to talk about it too. And what I love is that it's a win-win on so many levels. For many of us, once we connect with what happens to the animals, we would do this regardless of whether it had all the other benefits. But the truth is, it does have so many positive ripple effects beyond even the animals. So as we're caring for the animals and bringing kindness to them through our choices, our food choices and other choices, it also turns around to help our health. It helps the planet. And as it turns out, it may just be a key part of our spiritual deepening for many of us and our psychological well-being as well, in ways that I think we're just starting to understand. But certainly, compassion has been shown to actually have a positive effect on our nervous system
Hmm.
and our well-beings. And it's also interestingly, I was interested to find that, it's been shown through like Charles Darwin and others to be our strongest instinct, our biologically wired for compassion. So when we're shutting down our compassion, we're actually hurting ourselves. It's wired
Interesting.
into us. So I
And
think,
right now, there's so many opportunities to not walk in that compassion and not walk in that love and that kindness. I mean,
yes. And we learned,
yeah, it's all over the place. And so I think for me, the thing I have to do is kind of step back and I have to be really honest about the way I eat too, because I went through a period after my mother-in-law passed away that I did a lot of comfort eating with vegan junk food. And I mean, it's really easy to find very unhealthy. Ben and Jerry were my two boyfriends at the time. Uh, they have a plant-based, non-dairy ice cream, and I would go through one of those little containers a night. And I mean, that's an old behavior for me. And so I had to look at that and say, it's not just about being vegan, it's about being a healthy, healthy, healthy person and to be as vibrant as possible. And with what you have in your book, Vegan Transformation, there's plenty of examples of people who are living that way. And I so appreciate all you're doing, Angela. And we'll make sure this podcast gets out far and wide. And I encourage people again, go to Amazon, go to Barnes and Noble, go to the website. And again, give us that website, please.
sure, AngelaCrawfordPhD.com.
Okay, and get the book. It's a great read, and then pass it on to somebody so that they can enjoy it too, or buy them a copy. But Angela, thank you so much for all you're doing. It's truly a delight to know you. And I encourage people, go out, think consciously about what you're consuming, what's on the end of your fork, what are you doing for the animals, what are you doing for the environment, and most of all, what are you doing for yourself so that you can live a quality, healthy life. This is Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. Have a great day. You've been listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, inviting you to subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening or watching the show. And please let your friends know about the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. Live healthy.